and welcome back to the Beer Ladies podcast. I am Lisa. I am your host this evening, and I am joined by Tandy and Christina. Hello, ladies.
Hello, hello.
Hello.
And before we dive into this week's topic, which is one we're very excited about, it's a very broad one though, so we're going to warn you that we're just going to be sort of going very broad but shallow with this one. But before we dive in, I want to remind you guys that we are at beerladiespodcast.com. We are Beer Ladies Pod pretty much everywhere. You can find our link tree just by searching for us. You can go to that link tree or to our website and find ways to support the pod. If you want to buy some merch, if you want to buy us a pint, all of the things are there. All of our back episodes. And of course, you can find us on all of your favorite podcatchers or on YouTube. And we love it if you leave a like, get a rating, subscription, all of those things really help. So thank you for doing those things. So all of the administrivia out of the way, we're going to go ahead and dive right in because this week we are talking about Belgian beers. What are they? And again, we know this is a big category, so we're definitely not going to get into the minutiae of every Belgian style and sub-style and sort of arguments over who makes them, but we are going to give you kind of an overview of these different styles, talk very, very, very briefly about some history, but also have some of those arguments over things we like, things we don't like. Is glassware important? Because I know this is going to be a big one for some of you out there who like to worry about things. But before we get into that, we're going to do our usual what you drinking, or I think for a couple of tonight, what did you have laying around that was Belgian? But I think we'll start with Tandy because I think you're properly on the sauce tonight. So what have you got?
I am properly on the sauce and my glass just nearly overflowed. Okay, so I'm committing my own cardinal sin. I'm drinking a different beer from its glassware, and we'll talk about that. But I'm a bit of a stickler. I don't really like to drink branded. I don't like to drink out of branded glassware unless it's that brand. But either way, I'm giving a nod there to Chimay with this lovely glass, even though it seems dirty. But anyway, but I'm drinking Duvel. So the good old classic Duvel, the Belgian strong blonde. And cheapers, it's been a while since I've had one of these, but always a lovely one, this beer. And interestingly, I've got this book called, hold on, I'm going to get it, very disorganized, 1001 Beers to Try Before You Die. And Duvel is in here as well, because it's obviously a very well-known Belgian beer. And this book is very heavy. Look at this thing.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
This
for those at home, this is like, a big breeze block of a book here. So
it's a massive one. But it's they'll say in the tasting notes here, golden straw colored with notes of candied fruits and yeast in the nose. Light-bodied, but with a backbone to balance the hops and alcohol. Taste is dry with a warming, semi-bitter aftertaste. And I'm sure we'll get to all of those kind of descriptors, especially yeast and warming and spicy and, kind of the things that make Belgian beers taste Belgian-y.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes. What is Belgian-y? We will get to that. So that looks exciting. Christina, friend, what do you have that has been kicking around your cellar?
Well, I had like 3 different Belgian beers before Christmas, and I didn't drink all of them. So I have one still left. So welcome back to that beer again. So this is the Boon Creek Mariage Parfait or Marriage Parfait. I am sorry, my French is abominable. But so a completely sort of different style than the Belgian beer that Tandy had, but still very quintessentially Belgian. And we can talk about, sort of the difference between sort of these kinds of sours and lambics and whatever and the other sort of styles. But I love these sorts of beers. I'm really here for like the farmhousey notes, and the fruit and the sour and all my favorite things. So yeah, that's what I have. And I also have a really cool glass that we'll talk about in a little bit.
Yes, this is going to be fun. Excellent. And I'm also I'm boring and on some meds this week, so I can't drink either, but I did have a look around and I said, oh, I've got some delicious things that are waiting for me when I'm feeling better. I'm on the mend, so it's good, but I have the Troubadour Imperial Stout. This is from, now they call it the Musketeers Brewery. Back in the day, they just kept it all in French and So for people like me who took French, but who have abominable French and terrible pronunciation, this makes life a little bit easier. But but they are, now themusketeers.be is their website these days. This is an Imperial Stout, but definitely I would say for anyone who's not had this before, it still is, and we're going to air quote here because I think we may do a lot of air quoting in this episode, Belgian-y. Like it's certainly not like an Imperial Stout you would get here. I would say there are some similarities to some American Imperial Stouts, but I think that's for reasons that we can maybe talk about a little bit. But I think with that said, maybe we should just dive in, and I'm going to throw over to you, Tandy, to initially say, there are a lot of different kinds of Belgian beer. How can people start to just get a handle on what these different things are? And as we'll talk about how some of these things are very similar yet different. So
Indeed. So I'll give you an overview of the different styles that I've noted down, and with the very big disclaimer that I probably don't even have all of them. I've got probably most of the ones that we'd find here in Ireland or around the world fairly easily, but there's probably a bunch of local styles that I haven't included. And before I do that, I'm going to give you a couple of just quick little facts about Belgian beer, because it is kind of fun and interesting. And I'm completely basing this off of a work beer club that I did a while ago. So I'm paraphrasing and stealing from myself. So, righto. So, yeah, absolutely. So, brewing started in Belgium in the 3rd and 4th century. That's the sort of earliest known writings of beer that we know of. Please don't hate me, historians, if I get it wrong, but that's what I found. But hops were then only introduced in the 14th century. So as with the rest of the world, to bitter your beer, you'd use a gruit, which was a mixture of herbs and plants and different things that had bittering profiles. And hops were introduced in the 14th century then. And then in the 19th century, Trappist beers started to emerge and become more prominent. And Trappist beers, as opposed to abbey beers, are beers that are brewed in abbeys, but by monks. So this is, got a real religious connotation to it. But Trappist beers are different from abbey beers because the sole focus of that abbey that makes it a Trappist beer is to make money to provide for the monastery and the community around it, as opposed to profit. So an abbey beer can be made in an abbey, it can be brewed by monks, but if it's done for profit, it's not a Trappist beer. And there are a good few Trappist beers that are not just Belgian. So it's not a Belgian only invention. And there are 10 certified Trappist breweries in the world. It's changed over time.
And I think did we just lose one a week or two ago?
US.
Yeah.
Well, maybe another one, but a few months ago in the US we lost one. But there are some. There's the most of them are in Belgium. We've got 2 in the Netherlands, and then Austria, Italy, UK, and USA. Yeah, it's England. Yeah. USA unfortunately closed down a while back, but Trappist beers are one of those things that people associate with Belgium, even though it's not just Belgian. But thought I'd mention that one. Then 19th and 20th century saw, as across the world, mass industrialization, which reduced the number of breweries from, get this, 3,223 breweries in the tiny country of Belgium to only 106 in 1993.
Wow,
it's a big drop. It's come back now. Largely, there's been a good big sort of upswing, but 400 breweries odd around Belgium today, and I'm not entirely sure whether that includes all the different micro and craft breweries, but these are the ones that are listed at the very least. And then getting to this kind of Belgian-y essence, there is Belgian beer is protected by UNESCO as an intangible cultural heritage of humanity, which I just think is very special, because there is something different about Belgian beers, right? You can almost smell it and taste it before you, and then it's Belgian. And so let's go through a couple of different styles. Now, the BJCP classifies them probably in a neat and tidy way, but sometimes it can also be a little confusing. So for instance, in BJCP, there is a difference between Belgian ales, Belgian strong ales, Belgian like Trappist beers, because they've got this protected almost status that you have to be certified as a Trappist brewery to produce Trappist beers. But I'll go through some of the ones that we're talking about here. So Trappist and Abbey beers are not necessarily styles on their own, but what you'd find often in Trappist and Abbey beers are things like a single or a blonde. They're not always the same thing, but you'll find the lowest alcohol form of beer, sometimes a single, sometimes a blonde, sometimes a golden ale. Then you'll find a double, a triple, and a quad. Those are the sort of standard, and they're tiering up. They tier up based on their ABVs and their flavors. Their flavors are quite different. So, for instance, a double is like a brown beer. It's like an amber beer, and it's got sort of almost typical Belgian yeast spiciness and interesting kind of dried fruity flavors, quite a light alcohol. It finishes quite dry, but it's got this red copper sort of brown color. Then you get, let's say, a triple. And a triple, because it's now a higher alcohol, I think people get these confused a lot, because the double being dark, I think people sometimes
I think people still think, oh, it's darker, this will be the stronger one, when in fact that triple will mess you up if you're not paying attention. Yes.
Exactly. That triple will mess you up. Triples often come in at around 9%. Then again, doubles are normally between 6 and 8. So
there's a range there.
Yeah, there's a range, and they're not playing around either. Yeah. But a triple is a very interesting beer because it's really strong, but it's very pale. It's got a lot of sort of spiciness to it, but it's got good bitterness. The triple is the one that you've got a bit more of a hop presence than the other ones, I would say. And again, a dry finish. All of these beers, by the way, or at least a lot of the ones that I'm talking about so far, are often very highly carbonated. Have you noticed? I mean, they almost want to jump out of the bottle for you, and they're often re-fermented or bottle conditioned in the bottle, so they're naturally carbonated, which is quite cool. Okay, so double, triple, we're going to move on to the quad. The quad is also called, I mean, certainly in the BJCP, it's called let me just get my naming right, the Belgian Dark Strong Ale. And quads are, they can also be very, very strong. Initially when I started getting into Belgian beers, I always thought, okay, single, double, triple, quad, it meant like, 4%, 6%, 8, 9%, and then 10 plus. Doesn't always mean that, right. But a quad is literally between, again, 8 and 12% alcohol. It's not often as dark as the double, which can also be very confusing. But it is a dark, strong ale. So it's like a triple but darker, but it's complex, very strong, rich maltiness. This one's got more of a malt character than what the others do, but still dark, fruity flavors, spicy notes. Not as hoppy as a triple, more alcoholic than a double. That's the sort of placement that I think makes sense there. So those are, you'll often find those within the Trappist and the Abbey styles, but then there's a whole bunch of other Belgian beers that we haven't spoken about. So the Belgian Blonde is the probably quintessential Belgian beer that I think a lot of people know, and that you're talking about Leffe, and you're talking about Le Chouffe, and there's a bunch of blondes. Blondes may have come about as an answer to Pilsners. Some people think. I'm not sure if that's really true, because they don't seem to compete with them. They don't have the same flavor profile. They're not as light and easy to drink. They're not as dry. No, they often are, like as with the other ones that I've mentioned, they're often kind of fruity, sweet, spicy, peppery, and often dry finish and very highly carbonated. What makes all of these beers, I mean, these ones in particular, we'll get to the sort of sour and farmhousey ones. What makes them really cool is that often in the brew house, the brewers are using candied sugar and other adjuncts in their mash and in the fermentation to effectively thin out the body and raise the alcohol without it being a sticky mess. You know, they're
Right.
often quite light in body. They're very pleasantly light to drink, but they just hit you like a, you know, like a ton of bricks. Okay, so let's move on to a different sort of category kind of Belgian beers. Let's go to some sort of wheat-based ones. The most well-known is the Wit, which is effectively the Belgian equivalent of a Weiss beer, except that the flavors are a bit different. So it's a wheat beer, but instead of having a sort of banana clove flavor that comes from the yeast, it's got sort of a coriander and orange peel. And yeast is important, but the spices are added too, in a lot of senses, in a lot of ways. Then we get saisons. Oh, love a saison.
Yes.
Love a saison. And saisons, you know, we've had this down on our list for an episode for a long time, and we'll eventually get to it there, guys. But saisons are less of a style and more of a guideline. You know,
They're a vibe.
Yes,
They're a vibe.
They're a vibe. But saisons are farmhouse ales. They were often very specific to the local farm, brewery, direction of the wind. You know, things changed quite a lot within saisons, but typically they're brewed seasonally, often so that they're ready for the end of summer. And what we think we know is that they were often brewed for farm workers and laborers and people working out in the fields, so they couldn't be too heavy, although nowadays you get saisons even at 8-9%. So yeah, saisons are a vibe, not a style, but what does make them interesting or different is the yeast. Common theme, we'll get to more of it. But again, spicy, fruity, peppery, complex, interesting, some depth, but still being refreshing and easygoing.
Refreshing, Moorish, all of those things, yeah.
All of the things. Okay, so then let's talk a little bit about the soury type beers. So there's some interesting relationships between them, which is what's kind of fun. So a lambic beer is your most kind of basic bitch of Belgian sour beers.
Your OG of all of the
OG,
things, yeah,
exactly. It's a young sour, spontaneously fermented, mostly, you know, it's often a wheat beer, and at least part of the grist will be, you know, predominantly wheat. So your lambics are your young sours. Your Gueze is your old sours.
Now, I think you just got closer to pronouncing it correctly than I would ever in a million years. So
I've been thinking about it all day because, you know, my natural instinct is to say Gueze, but it's
I know.
Oh gosh, but anyway,
different category. Yeah.
Yes, totally. So Gueze is an old blended lambic. So what happens with a lambic is that the lambic is quite tart and sour. Then they get barrel aged often, or they just get aged in whatever they want. Sometimes they're put onto fruit, which then makes a kriek. So krieks are just lambic that have been on fruit. There we go.
Yes,
like
there we are.
Christina's
right there. Yes.
And before this episode, I had a kriek myself because they're delicious. But a Gueze is a very interesting beer because it takes some young lambic that's been made that's still quite tart, and it takes older lambics that have been aged, that have calmed down, taken on other flavors, and it's a blended beer. And apparently these came about a century after Dom Perignon discovered that blending different sparkling wines or blending different wines created a new kind of sparkling wine, effectively champagne, and it could re-ferment in the bottle, and it gave it all these interesting flavors. So a Gueze is just a blended, more complex, older sour beer, but it's still a lambic base. Right. And if we talk about, by the way, an eau de Gueze is a mixture of 100% old lambic, whereas Gueze that's not called Oda it can be a newer lambic and an older lambic blended to create something. So there we go. That's some of the lambics. Let me see what's next. Right. Kind of on the back of it, Flemish Red and Oat Bruin. So Flemish Red is a sour red. So imagine a red ale, but soured, because it's also spontaneously fermented, using literally whatever's in the air and whatever the brewers have cultivated and nurtured in their brew houses. And the Bruin is a brown beer. So almost think of a brown ale, but it's got that sourness and it's got that complexity. I don't know how often those are blended, but maybe they are. Yeah. Now, those are the styles that I've got. Are there any more that I've completely missed out?
I think that's a big one. Now, Christina, any that you've thought of though? Because I do have one in the back of my mind, but we'll get to that.
No, I think you kind of covered all the basics besides maybe more niche things, but yeah.
Yeah, and I think the only other thing to point out is just the obvious that there's also a lot of cheap lager made in Belgium that the whole rest of the world consumes. So Stella Artois, all of that kind of a thing. And when you go to Belgium, there's also plenty of local cheap lager that everyone drinks as well. So just, one of those things where it's just because you go to the place where they make all the lovely things doesn't mean people are enjoying all the lovely things all the time. Sometimes you need your, whatever, your lawnmower beer or whatever, and that's fine. Not judging, just pointing out that this is here too. So
yeah. And then, as with a lot of different countries that produce a lot of different beer, you will get IPAs and you will get stouts and you will get all of these things. But the ones I wanted to mention are the ones that are sort of quintessentially Belgian, as opposed to, adaptations over time. Even Duvel or Duvel have done, Belgian style IPAs where they've used their sort of yeasts, but hopped it like an IPA. And those are really interesting. But they're not super, super traditional.
Speaking about quintessentially Belgium, Belgian beers, I'm going to show this glass to the audience. And if you think this looks a little bit like a beaker, maybe something you might find in a science lab, anybody familiar with this kind of glass? If you're just listening, it's a wooden stand with a glass that has sort of, the regular kind of a pint glass top, but then it gets very, very narrow into sort of a rounded bottom, like almost looks like a beaker. So no prizes for guessing, but this is a quack glass.
Yes.
So who wants to explain what quack is?
Oh my gosh, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll tell you a story of how I got a quack glass as well.
Oh gosh.
And I think it's the same. It's kind of the same everywhere, but there is in Cape Town, there is a Belgian beer bar, which is really unusual and niche for, anywhere. But you had to, if you wanted a quack, you had to hand in one of your shoes. Because their story, their shtick, and they were sticking to it, was that this glassware was so expensive that you wouldn't steal it if you knew you were walking out with one shoe. Now, I've heard that story now told around the world in a few places.
I've heard different versions of it. Yeah.
So did you guys have to give up a shoe to get a quack
No,
glass?
my husband bought this for me.
Fair enough. So now you can just buy them.
In like the Belgian carols, like.
Yeah, we bought this in Belgium, I should say.
Yeah.
Like we were at the source. Well, not the source, but
Yeah, and I think I got one. I'm sure someone told me the shoe story when I got one. I no longer have one, but there are so many Belgian bars in and around Philly. Like there's obviously Monk's Tavern and places like that, and then all throughout that. It's just a thing that every so often there's going to be a promotion, like turn up, do X, and you'll get a quack glass or whatever else. So I turned up and did whatever the thing was. I think I turned up and might have been the only woman there, and they were just like, "You should have the glass." But again, this is like 20 years ago, so I'm sure that would not be the same now, especially since the last Philly Beer Week I had there, which again, obviously this is years ago now, but it was like, let's meet all the amazing female brewmasters of Belgium who have come over for this week to show us their wonderful beers and do saison tastings and all of that kind of thing. So there was an evolution, folks, is what I'm saying, even just in that time, like 20 to 15 years ago, between like, this is cool and normal. So just saying that. But yeah, the quack glass that was lost some many moves ago. So there you go.
I think it was probably just a brilliant marketing campaign that actually made you want the glass more than anything else.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think when I've had a quack again just on its own, and I don't know that I could point to that moment. So.
No.
I mean, genuinely, when we were in Belgium, we ordered it because the glass was just so
Yeah.
unique. I was like,
Yep.
I need to try this beer because what is this glass? I feel like I'm making a science experiment. Okay.
Yeah.
And the beer's fine.
Yeah,
But
that's fine. I mean, it's like an amber sort of slightly dark amber Belgian ale. You know, it's almost yeah. I don't know if it could be considered a Duvel, but it's I almost want to say it's something
definitely
along
more
those lines.
malty. Yeah.
Yes, more
Yeah.
It
malty.
leans to
Yeah.
malty. But yeah, I mean, it's yeah, like it was just, but it was fun to drink. Like we've
Absolutely.
talked about this so much about, beer drinking is also so important about like the complete sensory experience. So like having a fun, unique glass and like having that would take a beer that was maybe only, and I'm not saying that the beer is only like this, but
Right.
when you have that full sensory experience, it makes it just that little bit more special, and it really improves, I think, the entire.
Well, here we all are. We're talking about a beer that none of us are drinking, but and haven't had in a while, but we're still talking about it. So
absolutely, in the same way that I was in the Palace bar, and at least 2 different Americans came in and said, "Oh my God, it's so true. The Guinness tastes different here." And it's okay for them to come in and do that because I'm sure it does taste different from their bar that never cleans their tap lines somewhere. And they're here, they're having a great time, so it's all good. It's all part of the same thing. Even if they go home and never have it again, they've had that experience.
So
yeah.
I mean, Guinness definitely tastes different here than what it does in South Africa because it's not brewed in Ireland for South Africa, it's brewed in Nigeria. So, yeah.
Right, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So,
there you go.
Anyway, back to Belgian beers.
And the glassware. Let's stick with the glassware for a minute,
yes.
because some people do get very, very particular about it. And again, just going back to some of the Philly bars, there are some that do have the correct glassware for all of the different major Belgian breweries, although obviously they're not going to have like a special Stella glass. Like, no, they don't have that, but they have all of the other, the other fancy ones. They have like your Chimay glass or, all these other ones. So again, like, I'm totally down with it if someone wants to use the right one. Do we think like, I guess I'm not 100% certain how recent that tradition is of having the right, air quotes, glassware for the beer. But I think I'm totally here for it as a marketing exercise. But and I can see the arguments people make of like, oh no, if it's the wider mouth, you can smell, you get more of the aroma, etc. So to like get it, fine, all valid points. But beyond that, how important do we think it is? Like I'm a little bit like, but again, if it's part of that overall sensory experience, well, sure, why not? But
yeah,
I've seen people get fussy about it, and that's like,
I'm not fussy about it, but I think it can be a really important part of like the sensory experience. Like there's I'll talk about this more in a little bit, but there's a really tiny pub in Bruges, Gueze, that has like their own beer, and they have like this massive beer menu and you can get whatever, but they have these really nice printed glasses with Gueze on it, and you can get like little cheese and things and stuff with it. And there's just something about having that beer in that pub with that glass that just kind of makes the experience. And I know that kind of sounds maybe a little pretentious, but like there's just really something to having that whole thing tied together, seeing, because you really can't get it anywhere. So having that and being able to see, and it's just that little bucket list tick that just kind of makes you my inner beer nerd just so happy. I remember dragging my mom down there with me. She's like, why are we walking down this alleyway? Like, where are we going? And I'm like, no, it's just right here. It's this pub. And she's like, what? And then she goes inside and it's this wonderful pub. I it's just fantastic. But yeah, no, and there's so it's just the wandering down the alley to, finding this amazing beer bar. I'm not finding it. I guess everyone has found it if you know where to look. But but yeah, it's not necessarily like out in the open where you would expect to find it. You have to kind of look for it, I suppose.
I feel like the taste of the beer comes far more down to the freshness, the cleanliness of the lines, the cleanliness of your glass. Good brewing practice, as opposed to something like the glass shape. However, I don't know if I'd be super particular about going, almost brand by brand, because I think brands probably get a little bit fussy about their own, this glass for this particular beer that they make. But I do think that there is something that I now associate with, okay, if I'm going to drink something like a Belgian blonde, I kind of like this little goblet-y style.
Sure,
What is
sure.
this chalice-y style glass? It just makes
Yeah.
it makes it seem like the right thing to do. Although I don't know if it actually adds anything. I like the vibes.
Yeah.
And there's certain glasses, like I just don't think I'm going to drink a lager out of a teku glass, kind of, almost a wine glass thing. That just doesn't feel right to me. But I would drink a sour out of it, or
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, I don't know. So I like the fact that a lot of the Belgian breweries and brands have got their own very special glassware, but I just don't have space for all of this, guys. Can we just,
Yeah, if you're a bar dedicated to it, yes, fair play to you.
Gosh.
Yes. Yeah.
But you're right. Like I wouldn't want to drink a Belgian beer out of like a German Moss.
Yeah,
So I
that's
think
interesting.
It does matter to some degree. Like something about having like the really thick glassware, I just don't think would suit my experience of having any of the Belgian beers.
Yeah,
Maybe.
no, that's a fair point. Yeah, no, I can be convinced on that. Yeah, that's fair. There's something about what seems at least like the smaller, maybe smaller is not even the right word, but the sort of bowl of the glass that you can sort of hold and warm with your hands and all those things.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Feel free to disagree with us in the comments.
Yes, and if you are like a hardcore, like must have all my right glassware stand, like that is cool too. We want to hear from you, as long as like you're not that guy who goes in and berates the bar staff, because I've seen people do that, and don't. Why would you do that? No, and I'm sure none of you listeners do that, but you all know there's that guy. And it's a guy, but just don't be that guy. But no, I think that's fair enough. But then I'm going to pick up then something on you said, Tanya, like again, you sort of mentioned kind of the different flavors maybe of a different glass. So maybe if we circle back to some of these different flavor profiles we get, and I know Christina, you love like the hardcore sour ones, and I'm going to go on the record and say like I am a giant Philistine because I do not like lambics. I don't like creeks. I don't even like an oud bruin, even though it's brown. Like I'm just so basic. I love my doubles. I love my saisons. All of those things, and kind of your Belgian pale ales, triples, quads as well. But I don't like the soury ones. They're not my thing. But I know, Christina, you love them. So I would love to hear more about your experiences having them in Belgium and just why you love them.
Yeah, so sour has always been like my favorite flavor profile since I was a kid. Like there's a candy in the US called Warheads, and it like would burn your taste buds off. And I was always the kid that tried to shove the whole bag in my mouth at the same time. So like the more sour, the better, the less taste buds I have at the end. Perfect. So that has evolved as I've become an adult, right. Although I still eat Sour Patch Kids and Warheads, hands on them. To my beer preferences. Don't get me wrong, I love the Duvels, the triples, and I have yet to meet a Belgian beer I don't like. But I gravitate towards the sours. I love, Flemish reds. I love bruins. I like Gueze, and I like lambics. I like them all. Because they're sour, but I also really enjoy that they're really complex. So there's kettle sours and things, which I also like. But I really, really appreciate the complexity of the sours from Belgium. I like that there's all these different notes in it. I like that there's layers of things. I like that I'm getting this on the nose. I like that horse blanket thing that, a lot of people really don't like, or that farmhouse. I'm here for it. I love it. I like all of that. And then I like the, when they're aged on fruits. I like the creeks. I love cherries, so that's a big thing for me. But I love just all of the layers and the history. I like how it's spontaneously fermented in a lot of places, and they have these just massive open cool ships.
We did some cool ship thing a few episodes back. Cool ships.
So I'm just really, really interested in the whole thing. So my knowledge of Belgian beer history goes back to about medieval, and it's not so great. So I don't know, whoever knows all the archaeological evidence for like the very first brewers in Belgium, I that's beyond me. But I'm really interested in like sort of medieval brewing aspects and that kind of stuff, which is why I'm absolutely obsessed with Bruges.
And it's
which I've
beautiful
been
and
to,
all the things. Yes.
which is sort of like my happy place because it has all this like wonderful medieval history. And then, and this is, controversial opinion, and I will stand by this, my favorite beer country, which is Belgium. Favorite country for beer, sorry, Ireland, but honestly, if I had to pick a country, it would be Belgium. Because they have that, it's mine. It might not be yours,
No
but
shame.
it is mine.
No shame. No, yeah. I mean, we honeymooned in Belgium for that reason, just because everything delightful and delicious was there, and you, again, you didn't have as many varieties back then because this was a long time ago. But we had a great time because we had the frites and waffles and chocolate and beer, and like that's all you need. So gorgeous.
Like that's what. Wait, my husband and I went, and we got
and chips with mayo.
Yes, we would go to these amazing pubs that would have, oh gosh, we went to one that had like a tasting tray, 12 Belgian beers, and they're all half pints.
Oh gosh.
And it's all like, 8-9%.
Yeah.
Phew.
Wow. You probably had a good evening. Yeah.
That was during the day. I mean, we went
Right.
and this is not indicative of my daily life, people, but when I was in Belgium, I was in Belgium.
You're on holidays. Yes. Yes.
So, we woke up, we went to the pub and we drank those, and then we went and we got our frites with our mayo, and then we went to De Havilman, and
Yes.
and then we just kind of kept going to different places in there and ended up in a medieval basement cellar drinking until all hours. But yeah, it was, I don't know, Bruges is a magical it's like Disneyland for beer people, to be honest with you.
Yeah, we went to Ghent and Bruges for our honeymoon. Again, this is a long time ago now, but it was great because it's exactly that. You could just stumble down alleyways and find things. And again, especially, and this is like obviously a pre-social media age. And even then it was like hard to find things. You had to like look them up in advance and, and have maps, physical maps, all of the things, but, or at least like print out your MapQuest map and walk around. But just like that, exactly. And De Havilman, I love that tour, and just like, the historic fabric of the building and just all the things. And again, I'm sure like anyone in Belgium is listening is like, oh my God, this is so basic. This is what tourists do. And that's okay. That's okay.
We're tourists.
So, exactly. Yeah. And I know there's amazing like craft beer happening there too, where there's all kinds of other stuff. And that is also fantastic. That wasn't happening back then, but again, old, so long time ago.
Yeah.
And these things evolve. So I think that is so cool. And we definitely like, that would be an interesting kind of like, not even like part 2, but like part 4 or 5 of like us talking about Belgian things would be, and this stuff's all happening. But I think, it does come from this tradition, even if you're trying to do very different, air quoting again, modern things, like you still have this amazing understanding, I think, that people have, that you don't necessarily have in a lot of other places. So they understand that you're deviating from like a historical template, if that makes sense.
Definitely. Like I've done Brussels, Bruges, and Antwerp. And I really like Bruges because I'm a historian, and there's like so much history there. Now there's history in Antwerp and there's history in Brussels, but it's a bit different. But for me, it was the same thing when I went to Antwerp, the cathedral in the city center, and like all around it, there are some really nice craft beer pubs, really tiny, you just kind of fall in. They have massive beer lists. My mom was I had done a tour of the cathedral in the morning. My mom was doing a tour in the afternoon, and I just parked myself in this tiny pub right next to the cathedral. I was the only person in there besides like the staff, and we were just, chatting shit about Belgian beer. And that's the kind of stuff that I really like to do. And then Brussels was great. And we had I think it was Brussels Beer Project. I think that was, I might have. So that was like, they were making IPAs, and they were making, lots of like modern beer styles. And that's great. That's wonderful. Make what you really love. And we had gone to do some different things, but my favorite Belgian beer styles are more of the traditional styles.
Yeah.
I've never been to Belgium, sadly. I will go eventually.
We clearly need to do like an organized, expedition.
Well, obviously you're not going to have to twist my arm too much.
No, well, exactly. And it's one of those, always wanted to. but I don't even know where to start. And as you say, Christina, I
Right.
think it would be like Disneyland for beer people, because it would just be amazing. But to be honest, I would go there and probably not want to taste any of the more modern craft styles unless they were really, really interesting, because I want to go and get all the traditional stuff.
Yeah.
And I feel similarly about Germany. You know, I'd want to go to Germany
Mm.
for like really exceptional lagers, and especially the very distinct regional variants of all the alt beers and all the different things
Yeah.
that go on in different parts of the
For
country.
sure.
Yes, so I wouldn't go to Germany, let's say, and try and look for the latest craze in cold IPAs. I'd just I'd be looking for a good lager.
Exactly. Or like me in London, last week for work, I made my quick stop in at the Colonel because I love them. They're making amazing beer, and they had something with
they're
a
very
shiny
good.
new hop. So obviously I stopped in to have the one beer with the shiny new hop. And then I went and had many pints of cask mild, because that is what I do when it's accessible to me, is drink all the cask mild. And people can be like, that's weird, and for old people, and I can be like, I'm a weird old person, and I'm fine with owning that. But yeah, when you go somewhere that's not your usual turf, you want to have whatever's the traditional thing. Doesn't mean you can't enjoy the other cool new stuff, but you want to get the thing you can't get normally. And we can all get some variation of kind of, again, air quotes, craft beer somewhere. So
But I will say before we move on, if you're in Bruges, firstly, if you want any recommendations, hit me up. I'm happy to send you all the things. But in the sort of square where the tower is, there's a museum, and on the second floor of the museum is a pub. And you can get a beer at that pub and sit out on the balcony and watch the entire square. And it's
that's
usually
amazing.
never crowded. That's like my secret favorite. I'm not sure. It's not secret. Other people do it all the time. But it was something that I stumbled into.
Yeah.
And just became obsessed with being able to have a beer like sort of up and being able to watch the whole thing. Obviously, people much smarter than me had figured that out beforehand, but we came across it by accident. But I do highly recommend, if you're in Bruges, to go to the museum and get a beer up there and sit on the porch thing and watch the world go by.
That's a good shout. In general, is a lot of the museums in Belgium in general, other places as well, but Belgium in general, like there'll be like a little open air part or something like that, but there's often like a historic pub where they have a beer that's brewed just for them, or that is from just down the road. And so definitely, like, don't sleep on your museum beers. Like, there are some really good ones in Belgian museums, so keep an eye out, because even if it's just kind of what's like might be a tea room somewhere else. No, there's some good stuff here. So yeah, don't sleep on them.
That's very cool. So if we had to describe to somebody that's never had a Belgian beer in their lives what a Belgian beer tastes like, and I know you can't generalize, but
right,
what is it that gives you that sense of Belgianness?
It's such a good question. I think I always come back to just things that come from the yeast, because there's always that Belgian yeast character, even though, again, we know we're broadly overgeneralizing, but it's, I think in so many other places, when you see someone make, oh, this is our Belgian pale ale, it's because they sought out a specific yeast, and they did this and they did that. So I think you do get, again, kind of that effervescence often, more carbonation than you might get in something usually. You get often a little bit of that sweetness, but also that dryness, that pepperiness. And again, broadly overgeneralizing, but I think about why I love a good saison is because you've got that sort of almost like that snap to it, and it's that sort of lovely character to it. But it's as soon as you smell it, you kind of know it's there. If that makes sense. It's like it's art. You know it when you see it or smell it or taste it in this case. So.
I think that focus on fermentation, because that goes across the board to the sours as well, because it's that bacteria that comes in. So it's really that fermentation profile which creates a lot of these flavors in both of them. And again, I'm overgeneralizing because I know someone's going, I know, generalizing.
Yeah. Yes.
Obviously there are differences and nuances and stuff like this, but I think within, like what Lisa said, within the fermentation profile is where you see a lot of these strong flavors sort of come out. And with that, also, I would say complexity.
Yeah.
So I would say Belgian beers, when I think Belgian beers, I think layers.
Oh, I like that. Layers. That's a good word. Layers.
Definitely. Yeah. So having tried to quite like sort of define it, I think yeast sort of sums it all up as well, as you both said, because, if we talk about the sort of more soury ones, your lambics and your Guezes, damn it, Gueze. I don't know how to say the plural now, damn it. Anyway, if we think about those ones, they're obviously spontaneously fermented, whereas saisons would have maybe been spontaneously fermented but then harvested,
Right.
a lot like coveted yeast. There might have been one of those nifty yeast stick things. You never know how these things might have been brewed. So a lot of it comes down to this weird like house yeast that kind of goes around. I think the other thing, and it speaks to the complexity, Christina, is the blending. You don't see a lot of blending outside of Belgian beers.
That's right.
If I just sort of think about it, not much.
Not so much. No, the odd barrel aged thing where we do this one and then that one and stick them together. But and I think there are certain, obviously some edge cases where people are very into that, but it is a very Belgian kind of a thing.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people will even take something like a Duvel and they'll try and harvest like the yeast in here, to go and make something, because there is something that homebrewers often talk about. It's the sort of intangibles. You can buy a packet of Belgian yeast in air quotes, but it doesn't quite come out the same. There's something about it. It's like a sourdough starter. You make one fresh, it's okay, but once you've sort of used it, it adds all these layers and I don't know, these years of things to it, which gives your beer just something different. So I think blending and yeast are the biggest things in these beers. So if you're a home brewer looking to get into Belgian beers, first try a whole bunch of them and then save the yeast. Learn how to harvest.
Yeah, exactly. That's why so many of the things are bottle conditioned for your sort of for your pleasure. So there you go. Bottle conditioned for your pleasure. So we're coining phrases here tonight, folks, and I'm not even the one drinking. So just saying, I'm just this weird. It's normal.
They often do, though. A lot of these beers often also ferment quite warm. And that gives it also, based on the yeast, based on the malts. Apparently there's almost a different malting process and procedure with Belgian beers. I'm not really sure about that, so don't quote me. But they're fermented quite warm, and then often a lot of them are lagered. So it gives you all of the interesting yeasty flavors in the profile, but not always very cloudy or not always very suspended. It just means that they're aged and conditioned for a long time too. I think they borrowed that from the Germans anyway, but divine. They're just very, very sophisticated beers.
Here, very sophisticated beers, and surrounded by sort of wine drinkers on kind of the other side over in France. And so I'm sure there's certainly cross currents there that maybe people like to ignore but must be there. So as we were talking about before. So I think there's that sort of sophistication, and I think again the other thing is I think there's a good when you go to Belgium, and again obviously Ted, you need to go to Belgium, but I think people have such a good, I would say, understanding of it. I think there's just education about kind of how this is made, and not in depth necessarily, but I think people have a broad understanding of, oh, this happened to get this happened to get this, so they kind of know what to order. Whereas I feel like that's, again, unless you're a big beer nerd, those things are all kind of a mystery, and everyone's is just like, beer is made from hops, and you're like, okay, clearly, there's things have gotten lost in translation here. So obviously that's not everyone, we're overgeneralizing, but I think there is just a sort of broad understanding of what these different categories are, a little bit about kind of how they got here historically, and if you like X, you might like Y. So I think it's just easier for people to recommend things, or again, food pairing, we didn't get into that really at all. I think that's a whole discussion, but Belgian beer, so good for that. Like, we're not even talking like just like your mussels and frites and cheeses, but just like all of the things. So so I think what we're coming up with is that we clearly need to do, again, this was our introductory episode. We want to get in, and we're going to do that saison episode at some point, but I think there's so many other bits and pieces of Belgian beer we could focus on. Like maybe people do want a whole deep dive of a certain Trappist brewery, something like that. let us know. We would love to know what you want to hear about, or again, if there's someone from like, current Belgian brewery doing something super cool, we would love to know about that too and talk about it a little bit more. But these will all have to wait because we only have, so much time on an episode, and Tandy needs to get to Belgium. So just saying.
In the meantime, I'm doing my damn best to drink everything that I can find. So
yeah. So I think before we wrap up and before we kind of go to any final thoughts, I thought maybe we'd each just kind of go around and say like kind of a couple of our favorite Belgian beers, like a specific one, or it could even be a Belgian style beer. So maybe not necessarily made in Belgium, but inspired by. So I don't know. Do you want to start, Christina? Do you have one kind of on the front of mind? I know you've got one there. Yeah, please. Yeah, go for it.
I have a couple. So I like and recommend creeks. Boon Creek is very good. I know it is famous in beer circles, but it's famous for a reason. So West Bladder 12. Yep. If you can get your hands on it, I would recommend trying that. And yeah, if you can go to Bruges and make it to Degare, I would drink the Degare house beer.
Very good. Very good. How about you, Tandy? And of course, like we say, doesn't have to be Belgian specifically, just inspired by.
Inspired by. Well, I think the first one is Saison du Pont. It's the sort of it's the BJCP example of what a Saison should be, even though, as we said, really Saison can be a lot of things, but it's a great beer. And one that whenever I try and brew a Saison, I'm sort of trying to edge closer to something like that, but we'll get there. And the other, not a Belgian brewery, but a Trappist brewery is Le Trappe Blonde. I just love the blonde specifically. Actually, I like the whole range. I really do. But the blonde has got a special place in my heart. Oh no, I love all of them. Actually, I just like Le Trappe, but they're in the Netherlands, but it's Trappist and it's that feel. Oh, they're divine, absolutely divine.
Very good. Yes, I've got a Le Trappe also just in my. I should just start calling it cellar and not corner of my kitchen because that sounds fancy.
That sounds fancy.
Yeah. So I mean, for me, just a couple like in addition to like the Troubadours, and just I love everything they make. Like Magma's the other one I really like from them. Again, kind of the strong ones, but I just love so many like doubles. Again, just like the Westmalle double, which is just the classic example of the style. So good. Shout out to one American one to Victory Golden Monkey, which is a triple, and it is a gorgeous beer. It's also a beer that I have had too many of in a parking lot waiting to go watch soccer. Which sounds terrible, but actually is a delightful thing. But it is, again, it's a triple. You want to mind how you go with it, but it is a really, really delicious beer, and I think great example of the style. And again, just shout out to the Philly area for anyone in the States listening. So much good Belgian beer there, and you're getting it fresh, like it's coming straight in, good cold chains, all the things, a lot of things brewed especially for the market there. So just shout out to anyone who's into that, who wants to go make a special trip. You can also go to Teresa's next door in Wayne, Pennsylvania, wonderful beer bar, or again to Monk's, kind of the classic in the city. But then to go back to sort of Belgium proper again, I'm gonna go back to Saison du Pont because it's one of my favorites too. I just think it's one of those things you forget how good it is until you have it one again, and then you're like, oh, why am I not doing this all the time? It's just so perfect. Just such a good beer. So
yes,
pure class.
Back on that, definitely try Clock if you can get your hands on one of them. And just because if we're talking about like local, we can't do the episode as Irish living people without mentioning Meskin, who is our Meskin brewery, who makes Belgian beers here in Ireland, and they do an excellent job.
And they're gorgeous. Yes,
they do.
Beautiful beers, amazing brewery, big fan. So if you want something Irish but Belgium, I would recommend checking out Meskin.
Here,
so.
Yeah.
Yes, and then really basically any Belgian beer you get your hands on.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be a Stella. Although again, we've talked about Stella before because it started as a Christmas beer. It was a thing once, and then it's gone on a journey. So we'll leave it at that for Stella. But I think we want people to know so many amazing Belgian beers and that have influences all over the place. And so I think, again, we want to hear from you listeners. Are there any others that you really love, you want to see a shout out? Or again, if you are that person who is obsessed with glassware, like come at us. We are here for it. We want to know all about it. But I think unless anyone has any final thoughts. Oh, Christina has a final thought.
I do. So we've talked about travel a little bit, and I'm going to be
Yes.
in Pennsylvania in a couple of weeks for a couple of weeks. So if anyone of our listeners are from Pennsylvania, live in Pennsylvania, have been to Pennsylvania, and you have any recommendations for breweries, sort of central Pennsylvania, Lancaster, State College area, or anything to do, let me know, because I'm really curious what you think. Thanks.
Yes. Oh no, great shout out. Tandy, any final thoughts from you?
No, enjoy Pennsylvania, enjoy all the Belgian beers. To everybody, tell us your faves.
There we go. Yes, tell us your faves. And for those who are going to maybe get inspiration for Christina's trip, go back and listen to our interview with Lou Bryson, where we talked about whiskey for beer nerds. He's already given her some tips, but all the tips are more than welcome. So again, I would say you can find us as, at Beer Ladies Pod on all of the places. Hit up the link tree, all the things. We love it when you guys leave reviews or tell a friend, share, subscribe, all the things. It really does help. But with that said, we will say until next time, bye.